The last time I saw my husband alive, I was being escorted out of Memorial Hospital by two security guards while his family watched with satisfied smiles. James had been unconscious for 3 days by then, the machines keeping him alive beeping steadily as his mother, Helen, smugly informed the hospital staff that I was emotionally unstable and a threat to her son's recovery. My name is Rachel Martinez, and until 6 weeks ago, I was living what seemed like a perfect life. James and I had been married for 5 years, building our dream together day by day. He was a brilliant software engineer who'd recently sold his startup for millions, and I ran a successful physical therapy practice. We lived in a beautiful home in the suburbs, traveled whenever we could, and were finally ready to start the family we'd always talked about. Then came the accident. It was a regular Tuesday evening. James was driving home from a late meeting with his company's new investors. The roads were wet from an unexpected storm, and a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel. The police said James did everything right. He swerved to avoid the truck, but his car hydroplaned and went through the guardrail. I got the call at 11:47 p.m. The hospital's words were careful, measured. Critical condition. Induced coma. Next of kin. I drove through the rain in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I arrived at the emergency room, Helen and Richard, James's parents, were already there, along with his aunt Susan. The tension was immediate. Helen had never approved of me, something she made clear from the day James introduced us. In her eyes, I was never good enough for her precious son. Not wealthy enough, not from the right family, not the kind of wife she'd envisioned for her only child. The fact that James and I had met at a charity event where I was volunteering, not at one of her carefully orchestrated society gatherings, was a particular thorn in her side. "What took you so long to get here?" were her first words to me, spoken with that familiar mix of disapproval and barely concealed hostility. "We've been here for ages." I ignored her, focusing instead on the doctor who was explaining James's condition. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, severe head trauma. They placed him in a medically induced coma to help his brain heal. The next 48 hours would be critical. For 2 days, I barely left the hospital. I slept in the uncomfortable chair by James's bed, holding his hand, talking to him about our plans, our future, begging him to wake up. Helen and Richard came and went, bringing their country club friends, their pastor, anyone they thought added to their image of the grieving, supportive family. The problem started on the 3rd day. I was exhausted, running on hospital coffee and vending machine snacks, when Helen arrived with a man in an expensive suit. "Rachel dear," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "this is Dr. Morrison. He's a psychiatric specialist, and we're very worried about your mental state." I stared at them, uncomprehending. My mental state. "You've been here for days," Helen continued, barely sleeping, talking to yourself. "The nurses have reported your erratic behavior. We think you need professional help." "I've been talking to James," I said, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. "The doctors said he might be able to hear us. And of course I've been here. He's my husband." "Yes, well," Helen sniffed, "about that. Dr. Morrison has reviewed the situation, and he agrees that your presence here might be detrimental to James' recovery. The stress you're bringing into the room." "Stress?" I stood up, anger finally breaking through my exhaustion. "I'm bringing stress? You're the ones who turn every visit into a social event, parading your friends through here like it's a cocktail party." That was all they needed. Within minutes, Helen was at the nurse's station, tears in her eyes, telling them how I'd become aggressive and unstable. Dr. Morrison nodded gravely, backing up her story. By the time security arrived, she convinced the hospital staff that I was a danger to both James and myself. I watched helplessly as they changed the visiting hours for James's room, restricting access to immediate family only, which, according to Helen's definition, didn't include his wife of 5 years. She'd somehow convinced them that our marriage had been troubled, that James had been planning to leave me, that I was potentially violent. That night, alone in our empty house, I finally broke down. How had things gone so wrong so quickly? As I sat in James's home office, surrounded by his things, my eyes fell on his laptop. We'd always known each other's passwords, no secrets between us, we promised. On an impulse, I opened it. What I found took my breath away. First were the emails, dozens of them, between James and his lawyer, discussing changes to his will and insurance policies. The most recent was dated just 2 weeks before the accident. Then there were the video files, carefully organized and labeled with dates. My hands trembled as I clicked on the most recent one. James's face filled the screen, his dark eyes serious but filled with love. "Rachel, if you're watching this, something's happened to me. I need you to know." He went on to explain everything. How his parents, especially Helen, had been pressuring him to divorce me, going so far as to try to bribe him with additional inheritance. How they'd never forgiven him for choosing me over the society wife they'd picked out for him. How he'd discovered some concerning financial irregularities in his father's business dealings. "They're not who they pretend to be," he said, his voice heavy with sadness. "I've gathered evidence, documentation of everything. It's all in a safety deposit box at First National, box 447. The key is in the false bottom of my desk drawer, along with letters from my lawyer confirming everything." I found the key exactly where he said it would be, but before I could get to the bank, Helen made her next move. She had her lawyer send me a letter demanding that I evacuate what she called the family property, our home, which James and I had bought together with the money from his startup sale. The house was purchased with family funds, the letter claimed. "Given the circumstances and your unstable condition, the family requests that you vacate the premises immediately." I read the letter 3 times, each word stoking the fire of anger and determination growing inside me. They thought they could erase me from James's life, paint me as unstable, take everything we built together. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I called in every favor I had. My best friend Lisa, who worked at the hospital, got me copies of all the visitor logs and medical records, showing that Helen's society friends had actually disturbed James's rest multiple times with their noisy visits. My client Sandra, a detective with the police department, helped me gather information about Richard's business dealings, and my former college roommate Maria, now a respected journalist, started quietly investigating the charitable foundation Helen ran. But the real breakthrough came when I finally accessed that safety deposit box. Inside, along with the documents James had mentioned, was a sealed envelope with yesterday's date written on it in his familiar handwriting. Somehow, he visited the bank just hours before the accident. The letter inside began, "My darling Rachel, if you're reading this, then they've already started trying to take everything from you. But don't worry, I knew this day might come, and I've made sure they can never hurt you." James passed away on a quiet Sunday morning. I wasn't there. Helen had made sure of that. She called me 3 hours after he was gone, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "We thought you should know," she said, as if informing a distant acquaintance rather than a wife. "The funeral will be private, family only. I'm sure you understand." I did understand, but not in the way she meant. I understood exactly what she and Richard were trying to do. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the last 2 weeks preparing for this moment. The morning of the will reading dawned bright and clear. I arrived at the law offices of Davidson and Partners 15 minutes early, dressed in the charcoal gray suit James had always loved. Helen, Richard, and Aunt Susan were already there, huddled together in expensive morning clothes, pointedly ignoring me. Marcus Davidson, James's longtime lawyer, called us into the conference room. Helen immediately tried to take control of the situation. "Before we begin," she announced, pulling out a thick folder, "we have some concerns about Rachel's mental stability and her claims to any part of James's estate. We've compiled documentation from medical professionals." "Actually, Mrs. Anderson," Marcus interrupted smoothly, "we should start with the video Will James recorded 3 weeks ago." Helen's perfectly arranged expression faltered. "Video Will? But the one we discussed was superseded by this one," Marcus explained, pressing a button on a remote. The large screen on the wall flickered to life, and suddenly there was James, healthy and determined, sitting in this very room. "Hello everyone," he began, his voice strong and clear. "If you're watching this, then my worst fears have come true. Mom, Dad, I know what you've been doing. I know everything." Helen's face went pale. Richard grabbed the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. "First," James continued, "let me be clear about something. I love my wife Rachel with all my heart. Any claims about our marriage being troubled are lies. In fact, we were planning to start a family." He smiled sadly. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, that we won't get that chance." Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I held my head high as James continued. Now to the matter of my estate. Mom, Dad, I know about the embezzlement from the family foundation. I have proof of every penny you've stolen from charity to fund your lifestyle. I know of the offshore accounts, the fake donor receipts, everything. Aunt Susan gasped. Helen tried to stand, but Richard pulled her back down. I also know, James went on, that you tried to bribe me with my inheritance to leave Rachel. You suggested several more suitable women, all from your social circle, all with connections you could use. When I refused, you started plotting ways to discredit Rachel and take control of my assets if anything happened to me. He leaned forward, his expression hardening. So here's what's going to happen. Rachel inherits everything, the house my company shares, all of it. But there's a condition. I sat up straighter. This part wasn't in any of the documents I'd found. Rachel, James looked directly at the camera, as if he could see me. I've left you everything because I trust you to do the right thing. The family foundation was started by my grandfather to help children with special needs. In recent years, under my parents' control, it's become nothing but a tax shelter and social status symbol. I'm asking you to take control of it, restore its original mission, and expose any wrongdoing you find. He smiled, that special smile that had always been just for me. You have all the evidence you need in the safety deposit box, including records of every transaction they've tried to hide. My friend Marcus has additional documentation. It's your choice what to do with it. Helen suddenly found her voice. This is ridiculous. We'll contest it. Well, I wouldn't, Marcus interrupted, sliding a document across the table. James was very thorough. Any attempt to contest the will results in all evidence of financial misconduct being automatically submitted to the IRS, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and every major news outlet in the country. Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of gray. Helen, he whispered, be quiet. But James wasn't finished. The video continued. One more thing. Mom, Dad, I love you, despite everything. I'm giving Rachel control of the evidence because I trust her to be more merciful than you deserve. Whatever she decides to do with it is her choice. I suggest you remember how you've treated her when she makes that decision. The video ended. The silence in the room was absolute. Marcus cleared his throat. There are some additional documents to sign, but the key points are clear. Rachel inherits everything, including control of the Anderson Family Foundation. Helen, Richard, you have 24 hours to vacate your offices at the foundation. All foundation accounts are already frozen pending review. What happened next was both predictable and surprising. Helen, her carefully maintained facade cracking, launched into a tirade about family loyalty and ungrateful children. Richard sat in stunned silence, perhaps finally realizing the magnitude of their mistakes. Aunt Susan, to everyone's shock, stood up and walked over to me. I knew there was something wrong with the foundation's books, she said quietly. I tried to tell them, but they wouldn't listen. If you need any help setting things right, I'm here. Over the next few months, the full extent of Helen and Richard's financial misconduct came to light. Working with a team of forensic accountants, we discovered they had embezzled over $12 million from the foundation over the past decade. Money that should have gone to helping children with special needs had instead funded their country club memberships, luxury vacations, and Helen's extensive jewelry collection. I had a choice to make. I could have them prosecuted, watch them go to jail, destroy the family name they were so proud of. Part of me wanted to, but then I remembered James's words about mercy, about doing the right thing. In the end, I offered them a deal. They would repay every penny they'd stolen, plus interest. They would publicly resign from the foundation, citing health reasons, and never attempt to interfere with its operations again. In return, I wouldn't press charges or go public with the evidence. Why? Helen asked when I presented the offer, her voice small and confused. After how we treated you. Because it's what James would want, I replied simply. And because someone needs to show your grandchildren what real family values look like. They accepted, of course. They had no choice. Within 6 months, the Anderson Family Foundation was transformed. Working with Aunt Susan and a new board of directors, we returned to its original mission. The first new program we funded was a specialized physical therapy center for children with disabilities, combining my expertise with James's vision. Helen and Richard moved to Florida, their social status diminished but their freedom intact. They sent carefully worded Christmas cards each year, which I read and file away without responding. Sometimes mercy means maintaining distance. Last week, I found out I'm pregnant. James and I had started trying just before the accident, and by some miracle, our last attempt was successful. In 7 months, I'll welcome our child into the world. A child who will grow up knowing their father was a man of integrity and kindness, who planned carefully to protect both his wife and his family's true legacy. The foundation's headquarters has been moved to a new building, one with a wall-size photo of James in the lobby. Below it is a quote from his grandfather, the foundation's original founder: "True wealth is measured not by what we keep, but by what we give to others." Yesterday, I received a letter from a mother whose child had benefited from our new therapy program. "You've given us hope," she wrote. "You've given us a future." I sat in James' old office, my office now, reading her words through tears. On my desk sat the last photo we'd taken together, at a foundation fundraiser just weeks before the accident. We were both laughing, unaware of what was coming but so clearly in love. "We did it, my love," I whispered to his smiling image. "We made it all mean something." And in the end, that was the best revenge, not destroying what Helen and Richard had built, but transforming it into something beautiful. Something worthy of James's memory and his grandfather's dream. Something that would help families for generations to come. The security guards who once escorted me from James's hospital room now greet me warmly each morning as I enter the foundation building. Helen's society friends who once looked through me at parties now call to ask if their grandchildren can benefit from our programs. And every time I welcome a new family into our therapy center, I think of James's words about mercy and doing the right thing. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in tearing others down, but in building something so magnificent that their pettiness becomes irrelevant. James understood that. Now, as I carry our child and carry on his legacy, I understand it too. In the end, love wins. Not the shallow, conditional love Helen and Richard understood, but the deep, transformative love that James and I shared. The kind of love that lives on in the laughter of children learning to walk in our therapy center, in the tears of grateful parents, in the future growing beneath my heart. That's a revenge sweeter than anything hatred could devise.